right, well, let's start off with a lie. There's nothing easy about crowdfunding. Don't care how many steps we claim it to be. So we'll just dive into all the things that are hard, because nothing's easy. As you said, my name's Weisman. I'm CEO of a studio here in town called Harebrained Schemes. We've now done four Kickstarter campaigns over the last roughly 4.5, 5 years. And so we've learned, a little bit of this from the kind of trenches. We've now shipped 3 of the 4 titles that we did crowdfund. So a couple, things right off the bat that are really important to make sure that you can do this very concisely. You have to obviously have a really good vision. You have to be able to express that vision with an enormous amount of clarity in a very short period of time. And you have to be able to build confidence in the audience that you can actually achieve this vision that you're expressing. Now, some of us are old, which is not many of us. Been making games for a long time. We kind of get a buy on that last one, but when you're just starting, you don't. You really have to spend a lot of focus on how you're going to build the confidence in the audience that you can achieve the goal you're stating. And the audience is pretty well informed and very smart. So, the old thing you always heard when you were a kid, shoot for the stars if you're going to get over the hedge. Kind of reverse that. Don't go saying you're going to get to the stars, because the audience isn't going to believe you, right? Be very measured in what you're establishing as your goal, such that you are building credibility just by the statement of what you're going to achieve. Because the easiest way to undermine credibility is to state things which the audience is not going to be able to believe right from the beginning. The steps that I always look to is you have to be able to first inspire them with that vision, right? These are people who are taking a risk with their money. They're investing mentally, not financially from a sense of investment, but emotionally, and they're putting their money at risk. They're pre-ordering a game before the game exists. So they have to be inspired by that to motivate them to do that, right? It isn't going to be the rewards, the tchotchkes or the t-shirts or whatever you're going to send them is going to inspire them to do that. It has to be a game that they don't think is going to get made any other way, right? That they believe in this, they really see something that's unique in the marketplace, they understand why it's not getting built someplace else. And so that vision is critical, right? And being able to get that vision across quickly is what's important. You have to be able to illustrate that vision through the clarity, right? That you've been able to boil that down to something that you can do visually, do in words and in graphics very, very quickly. And of course, we're talking about the confidence. To be able to build that confidence, the first thing is really do your homework. You have to know what it's going to take you to build this thing. Have you built them before? Similar games before? What did you learn from that? If you're building something you haven't built before, you really have to do your homework on others who have, right? You have to budget this extremely carefully. There isn't a well to go back to, right? There's been a handful of attempts that people have gone back to try to raise additional funds to finish something they said they were going to finish on initial funds. This does not usually go very well. The audience is not very forgiving in that sense. A traditional publisher in EA or Microsoft and so on, they are much more forgiving in understanding that you were off on your budgeting than a crowdfunding audience is. So you really have to make sure you know what it's going to cost to do that, to get there, right? And even though this might be your first title, this will stick with you. If it goes well, if it goes poorly, that reputation you're building is going to be part, of your future. So you want to treat that with an enormous amount of caution as you go forward. And you want to be careful about the publishing costs as well, right? I mean, your goal is probably not just to give this game to the people who backed it, but to have the backers help you bring the game to a wider audience. Well, bringing it to that wider audience has costs associated with it. And you want to think about what is that going to take? What kind of marketing budget do I need, or PR budget do I need? What are my distribution channels that I'm going to be selling this to later? And include that in your concepts of what it's going to take you to actually create and publish this game. There's a whole very different kind of mindset on Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general that's changed pretty radically over the 4 years that we've been doing crowdfunding to create a mentality to try to encourage you to have very low targets. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as we get later into kind of the arcs. But when you're setting those goals, you can't only look at what other people have set for goals on their campaigns. While those are interesting data points, that has to be balanced with what it's going to cost you and what your other sources of revenue potentially are, right? Other sources of funding is for doing the campaign. And you have to make sure that when the two are together, you can actually ship the thing. People are only going to invest in a vision after they've seen you invest in it. This is another place where people who are really old, who've shipped a lot of titles, get a buy that new people don't. And that's just unfair and upside down the world is. But, you know, if you've shipped a whole bunch of titles, you have that credibility where you can go out and say, hey, we're going to do this, and you know what, we can actually invest less in the title up front before we bring it to an audience. Then a new team actually has to invest, be able to illustrate and build that confidence. So you really, you know, as part of that confidence building dynamic, how much do you need to be able to illustrate before you go ask for other people's money? And it's going to cost you money to make that initial prototype or the concept art or whatever that minimum bar you feel is that builds that credibility. And you have to figure out where that first fund has come from before you can even go to the larger audience and ask for more funds. I'm going to keep moving because we have a short period of time, so I'm just going to kind of plow through things, and then hopefully we'll have a couple minutes for questions at the end. On campaign planning, you really want to think about this like a military campaign, right? This is, when we did our first Kickstarter for Shadowrun Returns, like I said, about 4-ish years ago, we went into it pretty much with about a week's worth of planning, right? We say, hey, we'll throw it together, and, you know, blah, blah, off we go. And it was a bulldozer that hit us right between the eyes. Now, if you take the last one we did last fall, we had 5 months of planning and preparation before we went live with that campaign. Because of the way that this marketplace is developed, you cannot go at it, you know, half-cocked. You got to really know exactly what you're going for. So it means step one is do a lot of research, right? Look at similar games or similar projects and see what kind of funding ranges have they been successful in. What kind of reward pricings have been working? And there are sites out there like KickTracks and so on that you can get an enormous amount of data from. It may take some manually copying of numbers over into spreadsheets so that you can then analyze them. But all of this data is available to be able to really do work on yours. So for instance, at first one we had zero planning. This last campaign, we went through and manually entered all the data from every day of how many backers we got in every day, how much dollars we got in every day, and then built a day-by-day revenue model of what we projected our next campaign to do based upon the data of the previous campaign. And that data that we were getting is not proprietary to us, even though there are campaigns we were looking at. You can get that data day-by-day backer and dollar for every campaign that's run through the website like KickTracks. What reward items and content worked? Different kinds of things work for different audiences. One of the key things is social missions. This is something relatively new over the last year or so, of trying to take your audience and actually encourage your audience, reward your audience for helping you spread the word. And so this is game design. It is creating a game that you're going to be playing with your audience over the course of the campaign. And you really want to look at what kinds of mechanics have worked, what kinds of things have inspired contributions and gotten picked up. So, the other part of this is to really understand the costs of everything involved. We discussed first, what is it going to cost you to make the game you're talking about? But what is the campaign and the rewards going to cost? And this is really highly, usually not anticipated enough well. Like so, for instance, distribution costs. Even just giving someone a digital copy of your game is not free. There's costs associated with your servers and your bandwidth, and if you're going to be using a third party to do that, if you're doing something on mobile, well, people like iOS, Apple, they won't give your game away for free, right? They're actually going to charge you. One, you have to get someone's attention there, which is very hard, and then two, they're going to charge you as if you sold it. So you're going to have a very high cost of fulfillment for an iOS product. Design and sourcing. So let's say you're going to give away a T-shirt. Don't give away T-shirts. But let's say you were. Who's going to design the T-shirt? Who's going to take the time to source it? talk to different manufacturers, get the prices, make sure that the quality's good, be able to figure out how you're going to get them, boxed up and shipped out. All of that takes time away from making your game, right? And so being able to budget the time it's going to take to do that and incorporate that with your budget of actually your development schedule of actually do your game is a big thing. And then of course, producing anything in low quantities, COGS stands for cost of goods, is a challenge. Whether you've got to make a dozen of a really cool item you came up with, or 500 copies of something that typically is produced in the thousands. You want to look at what the ramifications of making small numbers of items are, and what that results in their unit price. What I call the three horsemen of the apocalypse: crowdfunding, apocalypse, picking, packing, and shipping. You would be surprised how many fledgling companies these three things have killed. They are vastly more expensive than you anticipate, especially if you're shipping overseas. For instance, on Shadowrun, we produced like a beautiful art book and a t-shirt, and we made all the mistakes you could think of, all these beautiful things that we were giving away as part of the rewards, right? To ship that package to places, some of our backers were in Europe and in Asia, was $60 just to send them the thing they packed. So we lost money on every one of those that we provided, right? So really have to do your homework. And this was back before Kickstarter even let you have different shipping costs for international and domestic. But you really got to do your homework on these items. Understand if you're doing physical goods. Now, if you can avoid physical goods at all, do so, right? It's an enormous time sink and money sink and opportunity for losing money. So if you can avoid it, do so altogether. But if not, really do your homework on it. The pitch, like Ben always says, you keep it simple, or you're the one that's stupid. This goes back to that clarity, right? We want to think about the hierarchy of information in a crowdfunding pitch. Number one is the video, and more specifically, the first 30 seconds of the video. A lot of your audience, even people who will back you, won't make it past the first 30 seconds. If you haven't made your case that quickly, you're going to lose a lot of your audience right there, right? And then there's a giant step-down factor from the video to the graphics on the page. Right? And then another giant step down to the text on the page. And then anything you put in a fact will never be read, right? I would say 70% of the email questions we get, or during a campaign, or the questions we get on the Kickstarter, in the comment section or on our forums, are questions we've already answered in the fact, but no one ever reads them. So you just got to think about this giant step factor down of information and make sure that you're communicating everything in the beginning, in the video, and then in the graphics. The video itself is important, right? It wants to be professional. That's part about building credibility, right? But it needs to be enormously personal, right? This is not a big corporate enterprise. They can get that game from EA or anyplace else. What this audience wants to do is help you. They want to help you recognize your vision. They believe in it. They want to back you, right? So you have to put yourself out there. Videos that have like tons of slick graphics and there's no connection with the person, that's a commercial. That's not a pledge. That's not trying to say connect with me and help me, right? People that are putting money into to helping you make games are not only do they want to see a game they haven't seen before, they actually want to get behind the scenes a little bit to watch you make it, and that's where that personal connection comes in, right? And also where a lot of the additional workload for you comes in. So the arc of the campaign, this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is the typical arc of a campaign in all of our experiences. You've got the first 48 hours, which is a giant peak. You've got a doldrum for 26 days, and then you've got another giant peak at the end for the last 48 hours, right? These right here are rough percentages of what the revenue during the period. So even though that doldrum feels like 26 days of hell, right? It's actually it's half your revenue. So it's important to understand this kind of pacing. And one of the reasons that we did like the study of looking at backers and dollars per day was to understand kind of the arcs and then be able to plan for that. So in this campaigning, right, in the first 48 hours, you need to open with a giant bang. And if you take one thing away from this talk, it's this point. The reason it's going to take you months and months to prepare to launch a campaign is that you need to know where your audience lives. Who are the people most likely to like the thing you're making? find out where they live digitally and physically, and go live there with them. Spend months in those communities. Become an active and valued contributor to those communities. Expose those communities to your ideas and to your vision, and build support long before you pull the trigger on the campaign. Because if those people aren't there to support you on day one, you're dead. And there's no way they're going to find out about you just because you launch on a crowdfunding site. You have to have built that support base before you pull the trigger. And this even applies, our last one was for a game called Battletech. I designed that game 30 plus years ago, and it's had a very large audience in the past. But we needed to go find all the fan communities where they exist on Facebook and on message boards and every place else they exist. And we reached out to them months before the campaign launched. And we started to expose them to some of the ideas. We gave them assets to share among their members and to promote. And we gave them a countdown clock that lived on all of those sites, all targeting when that campaign launched, so that they would all show up on day one, and we would get the kind of notoriety for energy. Because one of the things that has shifted a lot in Kickstarter and crowdfunding overall in these years is that it used to be like when we did the first Joradan campaign, it was about the end goal, right? And it was about people would actually not. Some people would not back a campaign that had already been funded because it had already met its goal, which makes sense, right? Now it's reverse of that. A lot of people won't back a campaign that isn't already funded, right? And I think it's a combination of kind of psychologically of wanting to back a winner, backing, getting involved in something where there's a lot of energy as opposed to where there's a struggle, right? But it's also a little bit financial, because if there are people who are doing a lot of backing, when you agree to back something, that's a commitment to pay for it, but you don't actually know if you're going to be paid for it or not. So if I say I'm going to put $50 in this game and $50 in this game and $50 on the third game, but my budget this month is really only to spend $100, well, I'll make liability for $150 because I've placed kind of 3 bets out there. And so if I know the thing's already funded, then when I put my money into it, I know I've spent my money. It's not it's a known entity. But the combination of the two, and those are completely supposition from my part as why this dynamic has shifted so radically. But it is that. It has shifted. And so it is important to come out of the shoot in those first 48 hours with as much energy as possible, because it really does have an enormous impact on people, on additional backers as you go forward. And then once you are live, right, you've had to build that audience, build that awareness, get them all there on day one, and then once you're live, you have to continue to market that, right? This is where that social missions concept comes in. You don't have a big marketing budget, you're not buying tons of advertising, otherwise, you're probably not money to make your game. So, how do you use what little resources you have to motivate your initial audience to help you spread the word, right? And that's where you want to look at some of the social campaigns that have been done in other social missions have been done in other campaigns, and look for ideas that resonate with your audience and make sense with your title to figure out how to spread that word during that period. During the 26 days of hell, the hard part is keeping the energy up, right? You want to think about that during this period, you need to be constantly releasing more content, right? New things about things about your game. Oh, what do you know? Google's very helpful that way. So that means you can't go into this kind of like trying to make that up as you go. You have to really work this through like that military campaign and have put onto your hard drive, weeks of updates ahead of time, right? The way we view it is we put down kind of a whole bunch of kind of perennials, if you will. Interviews with members of the team, discussions of different features, new concept art, right? That talk about different features. And we put those, and we have all those, as many of those as we can have ready before we launch so that we can go to them and not have to be generating them in a flurry. And then we leave cycles for us to then do things that are responsive to the audience, right? Because the audience is going to get all fascinated in discussing something, and they're going to either explode positively or potentially spin off in a negative direction. And you want to have cycles available to respond to that, but then still also have this regular medium content. So make sure you've got all of that content ready to go for regular. The other thing, as I just mentioned, is connection with the audience is critical. This is about you as people, and so you need to be able to, be manning every message board that's related, that's whether it's on the platform, like the Kickstarter platform, your own website, whether there's a Reddit thread that's developed, wherever community has started to post questions and talk about your campaign, you need to be there and be responsive, answer questions promptly. Never underestimate the value of a personal thank you, right? When someone backs you, write them back and say thanks, right? And then that will start a dialogue. You continue that dialogue. And that dialogue, wherever that is, be part of it all the way along. And then creative activities, right? How can you get your audience engaged? These can be part of your social missions, or they may be separate. But activities for them to get involved in. Whether if you're making up an idea, if you're doing a sci-fi game, hey, start a thread about what's your favorite sci-fi stories, right? And get them talking about their favorite stories. Just the more that you share with each other and you build a community, the more likely that you have something that's going to sustain and fund. The fourth horseman of the apocalypse that you need to be very aware of during these 28 days of hell is stretch goals. When you did your initial budgeting, when you did all of your work on planning your campaign, anticipate the need for these. Have budgeted them all out ahead of time, right? When we did our first campaign, completely caught unaware, not anticipate, and all of a sudden we blew through our funding goal in the first 24 hours. We now have, 29 days left to entertain the audience. They're pushing for more. We're reacting in real time, coming up with what we're going to add to the game in real time. And at one point, we said, so we're going to add multiplayer to the game, and everybody, yay! And then, the next morning, I woke up and Mitch went into the office and talked to Mitch. There's no way we can add multiplayer. What were we thinking? That's insane. And we actually went back the next day and said, hold on, new video. Sorry, we were swept away in the excitement, and there's no way to add multiplayer to this game. It's not what we're going to do. And you know what? We can score more points for that, right? One of the things we've learned continuously with this audience is don't hide bullshit. Don't say bullshit, and then don't try to hide it with more bullshit if you say something wrong, right? Be honest, be forthright. Even during development, like on Shadowrun and other games where we said, hey, this is a feature that we're going to have in the game, and then we get 6 months into development and we find out we can't have that feature for whatever technical reason or budget reason, come out and say it. Say it as early as you can, right? Provide context. Why can't we do it? Did we try it and it wasn't fun, which was the case in some features? Well, we built it wasn't fun. We built it 3 different ways. It still isn't fun. Here's what we're doing instead, right? That's, as long as you are straight with them and provide actual information, they are enormously supportive. What they don't support is when you try to BS them, right? So don't BS them on the stretch goals, right? You really know what you can do, and when you're done, say you're done, right? We were on Shadowrun Hong Kong, which was our third campaign, and we had blown past the goal, blown past all the stretch goals that we had planned. And the audience started asking, well, what's the next goal? What's more? And we got together and decided, you know what? We have to do the responsible thing. We have to say there is no more goals. We think adding anything else to the game is irresponsible and puts the game at risk. So any additional money will just be used for more test, and polish. We're not going to add any more features. And we were pretty sure that the funding would just stop when we said that. And we were wrong. They went on and did another 20% of funding after that statement, because they interpreted it as realistic and responsible. And it gave them more confidence in the game that we were actually going to, deliver on a game that they liked, because we weren't promising them the moon. So it's okay to say no to the audience, as long as you do it with context and with respect. The last 48 hours, now it's a sprint. You really got to amp up the energy. Save some really juicy things to reveal in those last 48 hours. Now, Kickstarter has a feature, which I love and hate, which is where you can hit a button, and rather than backing a project now, it will remind you about the project 48 hours before the close of the Kickstarter. So a huge number of emails go out at that 48-hour window. So a lot of people who had expressed interest but hadn't backed will come back at that point. Now, a lot of people use that because they want to see everything that got funded in between, right? They were like, I'm not convinced yet, but let me see all the stretch goals I got unlocked, let me see the other things. So you want to make sure that when they come back to that site, that you've completely cleaned it up, that you've gotten kind of your messaging of everything that's been unlocked, everything that's being done, really prominent, easy to see. You can't replace your video, but you can replace your page graphics and really update it so you can really see everything that's there. And you've got something really new and juicy to really drive excitement in the lab, whether it's a feature you've been holding back, or a character appearance, or whatever it might be, whether it's a new reward tier, which is sometimes also, a tactic you can do where you can introduce a new reward tier towards the end. But you want to have something juicy that really gets people excited right there at the end. All right, there's no such thing as free money, you've heard that, and that's certainly true in crowdfunding as well. You want to be very careful about that, right? The platform cost itself is about 10% between credit cards and the platforms and their charge. When you're looking at the three horsemen and your cogs, that's going to be anywhere from 15 to 20%. If that's it, if you're doing that, and that's if you're doing it well, right? If you've screwed it up, it can chew up a lot more than that. And if you're on a smaller side, you got to assume that it's going to be closer to the 20 than to the 15. Don't underestimate the cost of the community management. You have started a conversation and an engagement with that audience, and that is going to exist from now until you die. No, I mean, it just goes on. We're still doing community on our first Kickstarter 5 years later, right? These people bought access to you. That's part of part of the value quotient for them. And you have to live up to that. You have to be accessible and responsive. You have to be publishing regular updates on your development with the things that are going right, with the things that are going wrong. All of that takes cycles. And all those cycles are out of doing your game, right? So if you're building your community, you're not building your game at the same time. So you have to count on that as part of your budgeting process. So that's why I say it's not free money. You gotta really be aware of that. You're gonna have to pay taxes on the money that you collected. And it's, there is a whole bunch of discussion in the state of Washington, which we've been actively involved in, about what is the tax rate and when do you pay it. And so your accountants will give you different information on that, but be ready for it and reserve it, right? Know that you're gonna have to pay taxes. Also, the other thing you want to remember is that some of your early adopters have already bought your game. So when your game comes out, they're now not an additional revenue source. So you've kind of moved that money to the front end of the process, and so you want to make sure that you're not in a situation. Ideally, you want to be aware of that, so you're not in a situation where you're really counting to monetize them again. So I blew through that as quick as I could. I don't know if we have time for questions. We have like 2 minutes for questions. But if it's stunned silence, then that's fine. Yeah.
Have you heard the game Star Citizen?
Yes, I have.
So I think they're the most successful crowdfunded anything ever, right? So what is it and when did that game?
So Chris is an old friend, so I'll be careful what I say. So I think that's a different animal, right? That's kind of in the camp of an old guy who's coming back and building a game for people who loved his games, and specifically this game, a generation ago, right? So I think the initial, if you look at the track record of that funding, which is now I think close to $100 million. Sorry? 114. So if you look at like on Kickstarter, I think he did about 2 something. He had on his own website initially, that first period, he did another 2 or 2 something like that. And that's when the shift kind of went from crowdfunding to asset sales. So the vast majority of that revenue is selling assets in a game that's not out yet, right? Which is a really fascinating model, and I think can only be pulled off with somebody with a lot of credibility that they're going to ship a game that people are going to care. Because the assets they're selling are not cheap. I mean, they range from tens to hundreds or even thousands of dollars. So I wouldn't count on that as a model that's going to work for early games. Now, Chris is also kind of up against some pressure now. There's a lot of people who are going, well, this game's been in development for a long time, and we're not seeing the releases we anticipated. And there's been kind of a cycle of anxiety going, and then he releases something, anxiety dips, and it comes up. So for all of our sakes, I hope he knocks it out of the park when that game ships, because otherwise it's going to leave a pretty big crater. We've seen some of that a little bit this week, right? With was it Mighty number 7? I think that's the name of the term. They raised about $4 million in crowdfunding, and they shipped. They made a couple of kind of serious mistakes with their audience. They gave the game to people, gave the game to others besides their backers first. That's a really big faux pas. Never do that. Your backers paid for the front of the line, and you don't do that. And then I guess what I've seen in the press, at least I don't know anything personally. So people are unhappy with the game they received. Those don't help our causes, right? In terms of being able to continue to use this as a mechanism to bring things into the world. But it's a creative enterprise, right? They ship, and the fact that they shipped is already better than 50%. You have to recognize one of the reasons there's a fair amount of skepticism, well-earned skepticism, is that less than half the titles funded actually ship, right? And that's even after years of delay, and that percentage seems to be true regardless of whether you're a 30-year veteran or a first-time player. So the audience has a fair amount of skepticism, and that's why establishing that credibility that you actually know how to do this and you can ship is so important. Any other questions before I get kicked off? Yeah.
So independently, you have the option to crowdfund or to self-fund maybe a smaller thing.
Absolutely. If you have a vision that you can realize with self-funding, do so. Okay? Crowdfunding, as much as we love it, and we've done a lot of it, and we love that relationship with the audience, it places shackles on you from some sense of shackles on you in your development process, right? Because we've had to commit to a whole bunch of things prior to building them, right? And that means that there's a higher cost to changing path, right? Now, as I said, we've done that. We have gone to our audience. We have made changes in that. But there's no question that it weighs heavily on you because you don't want to do that. You don't want to disappoint an audience that backed you. And so it does weigh heavily on you when you're working in design. Now, if you, and to me, iteration is about what quality. Finding the fun and then iterating the hell out of it to make it really high quality. Well, if you've already got kind of some shackles on you by committing to things, you've restricted the amount of iteration and the freedom to explore paths during development as much, right? So that's why I say, and also the cycles, right? Just the support cycles, which again, we feel we get a huge amount out of that exchange with the audience, but it's expensive, to do. We have to support the team that is doing all of that communication. So I would say, for all the reasons of building smaller is always better than building bigger, right? It's just a safer way to go is to build small titles and incrementally make them bigger rather than trying to jump to a giant title. It's just, that's a whole shoot for the stars rather than the head. And two, you just got more creative freedom and more focus on the title. So if you really have a vision that you feel is, going to blow people away in a smaller scale, fund yourself, do so. Yeah. You mean so as we've added titles, as the community engagement continued to grow? Is that the question?
Yeah, so after you've already funded, and this is the first thing because you've learned you could build found that you haven't had to communities as much as the
Oh no, you do. You have to talk. Absolutely no. We have a very active publication schedule of new updates, new Q&As, videos, and that is kind of a tax. I mean, calling it a tax, but it's a scheduled production line effort that has to take place all the way through development and post ship. Like I say, for a long time afterwards. And so just because you've established credibility earlier doesn't mean that that's there. Look at Peter Molyneux, right? No one has more credibility than Peter Molyneux. He's shipped some of the most brilliant games of our age, but he didn't communicate. And it completely soured his audience on what he was building, not because they didn't believe in that he could build a game, but because he wasn't talking to them. He wasn't engaging them in the conversation in terms of exposing them to the process and treating them with what they viewed as the respect they deserve, right? So there is no one gets a buy on that. You really have to spend the time and energy to be engaged with that audience from then on. Yeah. are tools that that you can crawlers and so on to find out where people are talking about you, but it's a brute force thing to be there present, right? And because even just the kinds of information you release in each medium are so different from each other. What you put on a tweet is different than a blog post, which is different than Twitter, a Reddit, discussion. And so you really do need to have people do those. Now, they all don't need to be, FTEs. They don't need to be full-time employees inside your company. Over the years, and as you all, early fans, like if you've gone and you've lived in those communities, as we were discussing right before you launch your campaign, some of those people are going to want to sign up and help, right? And if there are people who who really get it, well, then and they're willing to devote some time, well, then those are people that can really help you and help you moderate some of those environments and start to be, represent you in some of those environments. You want to give that trust sparingly, but you want to incorporate the community to help with the rest of the community. But it is a pretty brute force kind of effort. I think it was another question there.
Yeah, so the reason I use and focus on is following you since Harebrained has been founded as a work of cost. So how much of that sort of legacy model is important to success in Kickstarters, and should new Kickstarters actually go seek out people who have history and maybe some name recognition, legacy titles or older titles, and bring them on to expose so that you can be part of it? Should that be part of a successful Kickstarter?
Well, yeah, I mean, in our case, there's no question that having been making games for a long time and being able to come back to properties which people had an emotional connection to from long ago is an enormous success. So what's the quick way to be successful on Kickstarter? I say, well, invent a time machine, go back in time, invent a game people like, come back into the present, reintroduce it, right? Then you're done, no problem. I expanded that to my friend Ilan, which is team up with a world famous comic, right? Who has 3 million monthly, users, and then you're set. So there is no question that, having properties that people care about, having track records that people know of or can research and find to build credibility are valuable. Teaming up with people that have audience already, like the OBL, enormously valuable. And if you can find that kind of relationship, that makes sense, right? That's certainly not. It's not the only way to success, right? Look at like Banner Saga. Those guys, they've been in the industry for 5 years each. They knew how to make a game. They had never made a game on their own. They had no previous kind of IP experience in terms of being able to say, look at this great thing I invented 25 years ago. But they had a beautiful vision, and they invested in enough of pre-production of that vision to really illustrate it to others. It's certainly not the requirement by any means. Is it helpful? Absolutely. But you have to recognize that when you reach out to somebody and say, hey, I want you to come get involved with us, that they're putting their credibility on the line with yours. And so it's a big ask. And you're going to have to prove your credibility to them, even to get them to team up with you. Do we have more time, or are we done? Oh, was there any other remaining questions? No? All right, well, best of luck.